Welcome back to Vuln Vibes. Ready to jump into another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're looking at a newly disclosed authentication bypass vulnerability. This one's hitting VMware Tools for Windows.
Sounds fun.
Okay, it does, doesn't it? So we're pulling all of our info from Broadcom's security advisory on this. And I think the big thing we want to figure out today is, what this means for those of us trying to keep our environments locked down tight. What are the real implications here?
For sure.
So let's get right to it. What exactly are we dealing with here?
All right, so this is CVE-2025-22230. Broadcom labeled it important and gave it a CVSS v3 base score of 7.8.
Okay, so not critical, but definitely something to pay attention to.
Exactly. The core issue is this. There's an authentication bypass in VMware Tools for Windows. It's all because of improper access controls. Basically, someone who's just a regular user on a Windows guest VM, they could potentially run commands and stuff as if they were an admin on that same VM.
So even if they don't have admin rights on the guest OS, they could still escalate their privileges. That's a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
Okay, so which versions of VMware Tools are we talking about here? Which ones are vulnerable?
This only affects VMware Tools running on Windows guest operating systems, specifically versions 12.x.x and 11.x.x. And just to be clear, Linux-based VMs, they're not affected by this.
So for anyone running a mix of Windows and Linux VMs, they need to know this only applies to the Windows side of the house.
Exactly.
Makes sense. So the million-dollar question, what's the fix?
VMware came through with a patch. They released version 12.5.1 of VMware Tools, and that takes care of the problem.
No surprise there. That's usually the first line of defense.
The Broadcom advisory really pushes for everyone to update to this latest version ASAP. And, given how easily someone could escalate privileges, I totally get why they're saying that.
Urgency is definitely key here.
Okay.
Okay, so who found this vulnerability in the first place? And is there anything we can do as a temporary fix if we can't patch immediately?
The credit for discovering this goes to Sergey Bliznik from Positive Technologies. Unfortunately, though, based on the current advisory, there aren't any known workarounds.
No workarounds, huh?
Nope. And that just really drives home the importance of patching as soon as you can.
It's kind of a wake-up call for those who drag their feet on patching.
Definitely.
Stepping back for a second, though, what bigger picture trends does this kind of vulnerability highlight? Especially for those of us deep in the security world, what should we be taking away from this?
One of the most important takeaways is the fact that we keep seeing more and more of these guest internal privilege escalation vulnerabilities. Yeah, they're contained within the VM, but if an attacker manages to exploit one, it's a huge step toward moving laterally, even in virtual environments that seem isolated. Think of it like a tiny crack in the foundation, something an attacker can use to their advantage.
And for organizations that are heavily reliant on VMware, that crack in the foundation could turn into a major problem.
Right. It just underlines how important it is to have really solid patch management practices. And those need to go beyond just the hypervisor. They need to extend all the way to the guest OS level, too. You've got to make sure your guest tools aren't being neglected because that can create a big blind spot in your security.
A blind spot that someone could definitely exploit.
For sure. And it also brings up a really critical question about visibility. How well are you actually monitoring and managing the security of your guest operating systems? A vulnerability in a tool that everyone uses might seem small, but if you don't deal with it, the consequences can be huge.
Absolutely. It's another reminder that you can't just set it and forget it when it comes to security.
Nope. You've got to be on top of it constantly.
So I think what we're seeing with this authentication bypass vulnerability in VMware Tools for Windows, it's a pretty big red flag. A reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant when it comes to our virtual infrastructure. Being able to escalate privileges within a VM, that's not something you want to just ignore.
It's a huge deal. And it's great that VMware was quick to release version 12.5.1 to fix it.
Definitely a positive step.
But at the end of the day, it's up to everyone out there listening to make sure that patch gets deployed across their environments ASAP. If you don't, you're basically leaving the door wide open for lateral movement attacks within your virtual infrastructure.
It's all about taking ownership of your security.
Exactly.
I guess that brings us to the big question. What does this vulnerability tell us about how the attack surface is changing, especially when it comes to virtual environments? What can we do to be more proactive in our defense strategies so that we can handle these kinds of threats in the future?
Good question.
Yeah, something to think about.
Definitely.
Well, on that note, we're out of time for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive on Vuln Vibes.
See you next time.
Catch you later.